Henry, where have you been during the coronavirus? Have you been in Montreal or have you been elsewhere?
Yeah, I've been in Montreal for one night in 6 months. We went to town and we were supposed to come back that evening, but we had something that kept us there. So we spent a night in town. So we have spent one night in Montreal and 6 months in the country.
So how far are you from Montreal in the country? Is it a couple
About an
hours?
hour.
Okay.
About 10 years.
Okay. And
1 hour.
so what are you doing to, other than writing books and so on, what are you doing to keep yourself occupied and kind of getting some stress relief?
Well, we try and get out in the canoe and the kayak every day. We bicycle a lot. We're eating really well. And I've been investing huge amount of time in sort of another angle on the coronavirus, because I think we're badly screwed up.
So Henry, what's your view on the coronavirus? What do you think about it?
Well, I think, this is an example where we really are between a rock and a hard place. I'm going to start that over. We really are between a rock and a hard place, I think. If we open our economies, we kill ourselves. If we close our economies, we kill our economies. And our authorities aren't providing anything new. They're providing all the old answers, which are important, and they work. Wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance. All that is really important, but it's not sufficient. The coronavirus continues to escalate, so it's not sufficient, and we've got to open our minds to other ways of doing it. The World Health Organization has resisted what's called asymptomatic transmission. People who don't show conditions can transmit it. They've resisted aerosols, which means that the particles, the coronavirus particles, can go beyond 1 or 2 meters. But look, they're trying to open the schools because we got to open the economies. Parents got to go back to work, therefore open the schools and put the kids at risk. And then say, well, 1 or 2 meters is fine. It's not. And we had that experience in nursing homes. And people locked down through the ventilating system because the aerosols are little thin particles and they go farther than those big droplets. And now it's an issue of pollution. I think the whole thing is going to be broken open by recognition that pollution is a major factor in this. And if we recognize that, we also have a chance to address the climate change problem. We could really kill 2 major birds, I think, with one stone.
What makes you think that it's a pollution problem? What is the evidence you've seen for that?
Actually, there's 3 dimensions of the pollution problem related to the pandemic. The first 2 of them are firm. Okay, the first one is that people who live in polluted environments often have compromised immune systems and weakened lungs, which means they deal with the virus less well, but they also are more inclined to get the virus. Okay. 2 is that the ultraviolet rays of the sun, if the virus in these tiny aerosols get up into the atmosphere, the sun's rays, the ultraviolet rays, will inactivate them. In fact, they're using ultraviolet equipment within buildings to inactivate the virus within the buildings. When you have a polluted city with a lot of smog, you're essentially denying that factor, and the aerosols live longer and can infect more. The part that's not proven, but there seems to be a lot of related evidence, is that the particles, the aerosol particles or the virus particles, can adhere to particles of polluted air and therefore carry themselves around the city and pollute people all over the place. Now, if you look at that, you've got to have a whole new approach, and the whole new approach is essentially to address the pollution and stop the pollution. The strongest evidence might prove to be that the reason the outbreak stopped was not just because people were locked down and couldn't communicate with each other, couldn't approach each other, but because they stopped polluting. If you're locked down, you don't drive your car, you don't go to work, you stop polluting. And it could be that's what stopped it. If that's the case, we could kill 2 birds with one stone. We could deal with climate change at the same time we deal with the pandemic.
Henry, you lived up north off and on for decades now. Do you see evidence of climate change in your part of Quebec, your part of Canada?
Marginally. For example, we swim, the swimming season is longer. We've had big problems on this lake this year with the water going up, but I don't think it's related to that. But certainly things are warmer. We still have winters where we ski and skate on the lake and all that, but in the summer things get warmer earlier, they get warmer longer. Some people are catching trout on our lake. They never caught trout before. Maybe it's affecting the wildlife in that way, and so on. But essentially, I look out the window and it's just as beautiful as ever.
So it's not like the Arctic where we see ice sheaves coming off and there's dramatic evidence of it.
No, our lake was glaciated 10,000 years ago, but that's past. So,
but you are very much a climate change believer. You're not a climate change denier. You think it's a big issue.
well, I don't see how anybody could seriously deny that with what's going on. You got to be really ideological to deny that. I mean, we're going to have to deal with it, and the pandemic may be the way that we deal with it. It forces us to deal with it.
Some people argue this is a black swan, the pandemic, and certainly in our long lives, we've never seen anything like it. Do you think it's a black swan, and will it happen something like this more regularly in the future so that we should think about it as organizations?
Well, look, you have to ask somebody who's much more knowledgeable, but I suspect, I mean, we had SARS a while ago. We've had Ebola. I mean, we've had the Spanish, so-called Spanish flu 100 years ago. A lot of people think this is a pattern related to the misuse of animals in food chains and so on. So, I suspect that dimension. I'm not sure we can relate the pandemic to climate change itself.
Okay. How has the coronavirus crisis changed strategy in the real world? Do you have a sense of how strategy, do you think it's more emergent than it has been in the past because of the crisis?
Well, you know, you're asking a biased person a question. If you ask someone to predict, they'll predict, the optimists will predict what they like. So, of course, my answer is yes, because I'm a big fan of emergent strategy. In other words, I think strategies are learned. I don't think they're planned. I think they're learned. I think they're learned serendipitously very often. So the comments I made about the coronavirus are sort of similar. This may be serendipitously the chance to deal with climate change. You know, when you're faced, the time you use emergent strategy most successfully and most importantly is when you don't know what the heck to do next. So you just try something for anything. The shocking thing for me about this pandemic, especially the World Health Organization, is, you know, they're stuck too between a rock and a hard place, and yet they're absolutely closed to entertaining other alternative explanations.
You've studied management and how managers work and the nature of work since the 60s in your PhD at MIT. Do you think work will change in terms of having to go to the office, things like that? Because we've had 6 months where we've not gone to the office. You haven't been at McGill in months. Is this going to change how we work? What's your sense of that?
You know, I think with anything new and all these technologies, I mean, Zoom may not be new, but the use of it is new. And I think with all these technologies, once we get, it's like a new relationship with a partner, you know. At first, everything is wonderful and terrific. And, you know, we're going to close down our offices and move everybody out to their homes and all that. And I think we'll, like with a new relationship, we'll sober up and be both sides eventually. We're working on a little article now to see both sides of it, you know, the positive and the negative.
What do you see as the positives of this that come to your mind at this point?
Well, you know, the thing that intrigues me most is precisely what we're doing now, okay? Here I am. I'm looking at my image. I I should be looking at your image, but I didn't change it. So I'm looking at my image, or you're looking at my image, which is full on the scene completely. If even if we were in an office together, or if this was a speech, there might be a TV screen behind, but you don't get that intimate kind of thing. Whereas you and I, I should be putting it on the gallery view. Okay, so now I'm on the gallery view. So you and I are seeing each other at very close range, very closely. This eye's a bit shut because I'm having trouble, and you can see that. It's right there in your face. And so it's very intimate. But the other side of that is Hania Mohammadi, my doctoral student with whom I'm doing this, is saying that it's a bit mistaken to think this is so intimate. It's a kind of very scheduled kind of intimacy, which means the downside of this intimacy is, Karl, you and I don't bump into each other in the elevator anymore. So we managed to keep contact, but lots of people can't keep contact because they're not at the coffee machine. So that's going to be a big downside.
Sorry, my battery's running out, so I'm just going to plug in my battery here before it dies.
Okay.
I'll just be 2 seconds, Henry.
Okay.
I set up in the basement. There was a guy fixing our back door, so it was too noisy there.
So now I realize you're not in that building at McGill. You're not in that room at McGill at all.
Two of my classes are by Zoom and one is in person. So I actually was I was in 151 last night. So it's nice to be back and with human beings.
How many people were in there?
Well, the maximum is, I think, 39, and I had 38. So.
And who are they?
Oh, it's MBA students. And it was the CEO class where I have 24 CEOs coming. So David Bensadou, who runs Aldo, was there.
Yeah, okay.
And he talked about CCAA and that sort of thing. So I have a CEO class, and rightly you point out that we shouldn't worship CEOs. Why do you think we put so much attention on the CEOs?
Why do we put so much attention on the CEOs? Why do we put so much attention on leadership? I mean, it's this idea of the great hero is going to come in and save us, and this idea that it's all about the chief executive. And what this pandemic is proving is, it's true. It's all about the chief executive. On the downside, that the countries, not companies, but the countries that are doing the worst have horrible leadership. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump in the US, Johnson in the UK. And the countries that are doing well, it seems to me, have a kind of leadership that's embedded in communityship, like in New Zealand, like in Denmark, like in Canada to some extent, like in Germany. To me, a healthy country combines governments that protect us, businesses that supply us, and communities that engage us. And we have all three, and they do it collaboratively. And we have all three in the countries that are doing best. And we have complete distortion of those three, including too much emphasis on leadership in the countries that are doing worst.
We see the growth of the strong man in a number of countries around the world, in Eastern Europe, China, the US. This is a worrying trend. I would take it from your viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. It amazes me what people are willing to tolerate, whether it's Orban in Hungary or what's his name in Turkey. I'm blanking on his name, but anyway. And Trump and Johnson and Bolsonaro. No, we're learning. We need strong leadership. I think strong leadership in crisis is important in some respects, but not this obsessive leadership that's strong in the sense of powerful, but lazy as in Trump, as in those three guys, lazy leadership, unresponsive leadership, ignorant leadership, just plain stupid leadership. And I don't hesitate to use that word for those three people.
China, throughout your whole life, you've gone to China a number of times, you've watched China. China is in a different country than it was 50 years ago. What's your sense of where China might be going? Do you have a feeling for that?
No, but I'll tell you something about that. China is sort of the exception in a way, because China is not a society. It's completely skewed in the power of the Communist Party and government. Business is strong, but kowtowing to the government, and communities very weak. They make sure community forces are very weak. In times of crisis, you turn to stronger leadership and you turn to government more. And so China is benefiting from that. But it's also been open to, I think, dealing with things on the crisis, not on other things necessarily, but on the crisis, open to dealing with things. I wrote a piece over the past 6 months. I've probably rewritten it 30 times or more about the role of pollution and all that, and absolutely blocked time after time after time by all the major newspapers, or the ones I sent it to, which are some of the major ones. Sometimes they respond, most of the time they don't even bother to respond. It just got published today, guess where? In China.
Really? In Chinese or in English?
In Mandarin, yeah.
Okay, congratulations. I know it's been a long time. It's a lot of work. What book are you writing right now, Henry? What is the book you're working on today?
Well, today I'm working on the virus stuff, but recently my most successful book was called Structure in Fives, about different forms of organizations, kind of 4 forms. Today I call them personal form with an entrepreneur as a head, this leadership thing, program form like classic machine bureaucracy, professional form like universities, hospitals, and project form like a high-tech company. And so I'm revising that as Structure in Sevens, 4 forms and 7 forces. So the other forces are culture and diversification and politics. And so I'm revising that book. It's coming out really well. Except I've been spending so much time on the pollution pandemic issue. I have a piece up on my website, mintzberg.org. People can find it called Pollution and Pandemic. And my current blog is called, I forget what it's called. It's called We Did Everything Right. But we did everything right. About a tale of 3 infections, 3 people who did it all right and all got sick.
How much is the book rewritten? Because it was written a number of years ago originally. Is it 5% different? What percentage different is it from the original first edition?
I would say 50% for the text. Conceptually, the same framework, but a much tighter, neater rendition of it. So that would be like 30%. You can't put a number on it, but it's the same book, same basic idea, but constructed in a much more coherent way. So say 40% something.
Are the ideas substantially different, or is more that you're rewriting it for today's world and writing it better in a sense?
I'm writing it better for today's world in the sense that I'm trying to make it clearer, and I'm using examples from today's world. But I don't think these issues change that much. You'll get a kick out of my use of sports, Karl, because I said 4 forms, and I got a sport that goes with each one. I might have run this through you a while ago.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
Tell us which sport for which.
So for the machine bureaucratic organization, it's American-Canadian football. No question. You got leadership on the field, a quarterback, everybody's pre-programmed, the plays are called in advance. Everything is incredibly structured. Amazing. No sport comes even close to football. For the professional, I use baseball. I mean, baseball is the perfect sport for the virus because everybody keeps their distance. There are no play other than the dugout. The players are far apart. You watch a double play, you know exactly what's going to happen. It's just the execution. It's very skilled, very talented, very individualistic. You know, the batter is on his own or her own. The batter's on their own. The pitcher's on his own with or her own with relationship with the catcher a little bit. The outfielders are on their own and so on. Then you go to the project organization, hockey, soccer, basketball. Every time the puck or the ball goes to the other end and starts, it's a new project. You know, in baseball, in football, the offensive team knows exactly what's going to happen or what they hope will happen when they call the play. The other team doesn't, but they know who's got to do what, who's going to run here, who's got to catch the ball, who's got to throw it. All that is pre-programmed. In hockey, it all unfolds. You never know quite what's going to happen. Nobody ever knows quite what's going to happen. It's all spur of the moment. So every time you take the puck or the ball offensively, it's like a new project. It's a project organization. And then we had trouble finding one for the personal organization. What sport, like an entrepreneurial company where one person is so much in charge and calls all the shots? And then we realized World Cup yachting. The person with the money probably helps design the boat, funds it, skippers, skips, whatever it's called. It's all personal. So kind of fun.
Our students write. Now you've been writing, how many books have you written?
20.
Take us inside your writing schedule. How do you write? And do you ever edit what you write?
Anything new or fresh, because some of those books are compilations of other articles and all that thing. So, but of the major books, which have been about every 5 years or so, I would say that with few exceptions, no word has been rewritten less than 10 times. I write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. I'm such a critic of my own stuff. So I'm constantly revising. I can show you piles that high of books that have been draft after draft because I write. I might edit on the screen, but I write. And then Santa, my assistant for 23 years, she types it up. She can read my handwriting better than me because often I don't know what the hell I wrote and she knows. So she types it up, and then maybe the second, I'll usually do revisions on hard copy, and eventually later on I'll do revisions on the screen. I write every morning religiously. That's why we're here at 3 in the afternoon. 9 and 9:30 to 1 o'clock or so is sacred.
Does it come out? I guess it doesn't come out fully formed as you edit it so many times. But are the ideas in your mind so when you sit down and kind of the words pour out? Or do you have to spend a lot of time arguing with yourself and have it, you know, a tougher process?
You know, sometimes if I'm very passionate about a piece, but that's more like an op-ed piece or a short piece, it might just spill out. It's, you know, the problem with writing, the great challenge of writing everything except a diary is that you're putting into linear order something that is not linear. If I'm writing about the structure of organizations, there's nothing linear about that. There's no, you know, where do you start? If I was going to describe your face, there's nothing linear. I could start with the glasses or the nose or the baldness or whatever. But I have to start somewhere. And so books are linear from the first word to the last word, but they're describing something that's not linear. That's the hard part. And the hard part is getting it into an order and getting into order what you're trying to say. Usually I know roughly what I'm trying to say. On the structuring book, the first version of it, which is a longer 500-page version, I had a 200-page outline. And I wrote that book in 3 months. Because the outline was so good and so thorough, but the hard part was getting the outline because the outline's linear order. Once it's linear, it flows.
Where do new ideas for books come from?
Who knows? I mean, I don't know. I wrote a book called Why I Hate Flying, which then got changed to The Flying Circus, which is up on my website. If anybody wants to see it, it's out of print, so they can just go to mintzberg.org and click on The Flying Circus. Why did I write that? Because I got so fed up with airlines and all the shenanigans. So I wrote a spoof of it. And then what I did, I hate these accolades that people write. Get all your friends to say that your book is the best thing since sliced bread. So I had everybody write insults. And so I have a collection of insults. Like, once I put this book down, I couldn't pick it up again. Or my mother, when she was 90, wrote, "I could have been so proud."
So, you have a good sense of humor. Does that make life go easier if you laugh quite a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there are why people and there are why not people. Or there are pat people and there are playful people. And I get along with playful people. You know, when I meet someone, I'm usually making some kind of silly joke to see what happens. I don't think about it, but, you know, to see how they respond. If they look at me, what the hell are you talking about? They're probably not playful. If they snap back with something sharper, then they're playful. And the world becomes so pat. Everything is just so structured. And we need much more playfulness. In this pandemic, I don't want to make light of it, but we need to be much more playful in this pandemic.
Our dean is moving down to the States. We knew it needing a new dean. Henry, you're one of our great management thinkers. Should I put your name forward to be dean?
Only if you want to break our friendship.
It doesn't appeal.
No, I love what I do. I want to write about it. I don't want to do it. I know too much, Karl. I've written 3 books on what managers do. I know too much.
So you're over 65.
And by the way, Karl, the way, I know my colleagues too well, and I don't want to have to deal with all these spoiled brats like myself.
You're over 65. You don't seem to understand retirement. Why don't you retire and just relax?
Because I relax by what I do. You know, I'm not even sure what it would mean, because I'd keep writing. I mean, people, if they relax, they go out and play golf or they have a hobby. Well, my hobby is writing. Not only, I do other things. I paddle canoes and all that, but I have lots of time to do that. And going on a big hike on Saturday morning, and so on. So I have time to do. Dulcie and I have time to do everything we want to do. So why spoil it?
You had a presentation of the Board of Governors with your daughter, Susie, who's a PhD student at McGill. What was your thoughts on the future, your and Susan's thoughts on the future of universities?
Well, you know, we were sort of looking at 2 models, and one model we call the ivory tower, or sort of top down or looking down model, where the academics are kind of on top and they're looking out at the world, but they're pretty distant. So down there somewhere, and they mail out questionnaires to find out what's going on down there. And teaching is what the French call magistral, which means lecturing at a distance, and so on. And administration means we got top management who give orders. The octopus model is the reaching out model, that we're on the ground and we're reaching out to our communities and to our, so teaching involves engagement of the students sitting at round tables in the programs, and reaching out means researching by getting on the ground, seeing what people are doing and thinking, and so on and so forth. And what we argue is you need both, but we need to move much more towards a reaching out model.
Do you give lectures as much as you used to, or when you're in the classroom with executives in the IMPM, the IMHL, what percentage of the time is you talking, giving a lecture, and what percentage of the time is it the participants talking?
Well, and there's another part to it. Like this morning, I gave a talk to the British Academy of Management, And it was probably 50-50 Q&A and lecturing, although usually it's 100% Q&A like we're doing. Right now, almost every, and I'm doing one in Colombia. Next week, I'm doing one in Cairo or for Cairo. A little while after Colombia, I did a one all Q&A on my healthcare book, Managing the Myths of Healthcare. In China, a couple of weeks ago, there were 41,000 people live. 41,000. When we did it on my bedtime stories book, Bedtime Stories for Managers, we had 50,000. And we had 11,000 on that book in Russia. So that's all Q&A. So it's much more interactive in a way. And I think, frankly, the way we're doing it now is much more effective than me just giving a speech.
The great thing about this pandemic is that you're reaching bigger audience than if you got on a plane. So that's a positive side to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's amazing. It's amazing. And you know, if it's Q&A, there's not a lot of preparatory work. But, you know, 10 minutes before I open up my laptop and have to put on a nicer shirt than I usually wear. Usually this is dressed up, what you're looking at. But I just walk up, turn it on, and we go.
We use cases in some of our classes. I know you've spoken a bit against cases. What is it? What's your case against cases?
I think cases are good for learning things like accounting and marketing and finance and those things. In other words, give you an example, give you sort of real life examples. I think they're not good for teaching management because you don't, they're third hand. You know, Livingston wrote a famous article in the Harvard Business Review many years ago called the was it the case for second, he had secondhand management in there. And he was saying that cases, even though he's a Harvard professor, but an executive, and he was saying that cases are second-handed, but they're not second-handed. Cases are about fifth-handed. You know, a professor makes a contact with a company, sends in a research assistant. The research assistant interviews the chief executive, especially 60% of the cases focus on the chief executive as if there's nothing else, because he's a Harvard graduate or she's a Harvard graduate. It comes back, the student writes it up, the professor edits it, goes to whoever's going to teach it, then it goes to the students. That's not secondhand. That's about fifth or sixth hand. It's unreal. And then the students are supposed to sit there in a classroom and pronounce on what Google should do now. Why? Because they read 20 pages on Google last night. And that may be all they ever knew, really, about Google. And now they're suddenly supposed to pronounce on what Google is supposed to do. It's a superficial exercise. And it creates the kind of chief executives that George W. Bush, Harvard MBA, was practicing. He was completely disconnected. You know, the evidence of MBAs as chief executives is that they perform less well than people who don't have MBAs, and they get paid more.
You've traveled a lot, dozens and dozens of countries for decades. What are maybe 2 or 3 countries our undergraduates, in your view, should definitely have on their travel list?
You know, I'm going to answer that in a very different kind of way. Because when somebody said to me a while ago, what country would you like to visit? I said, Sudan. Why did I say Sudan? Because we have a very close friend. We call him an adopted son. He really is like an adopted son. He comes from Sudan. Why would I want to go to Sudan with him? Because I'd really see Sudan. So I want to go to places where I can really see what's going on. And so, I mean, China's fascinating. Japan, I love Japan. You know, lots of countries. I love Switzerland. I love New Zealand. But more frankly, I love the geography. I mean, I love Switzerland for the mountains and New Zealand for the scenery and so on and so forth. But I think it makes a huge difference how you're seeing a country. If you can really see it, when we go to India, we know so many people that we really end up we never end up in the tourist places. We end up seeing Indian life in all kinds of ways. And that's what's really interesting about India.
So you're a traveler rather than a tourist.
Uh, I guess you could say that. Yeah, I'm not big on tourists. I'm not big on hopping out of a bus, taking a picture, and then showing it to the family when I get home.
So you love to talk to local people, particularly ones you know, about what's actually going on in this place.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's hard for most people to do. I'm just lucky because I have contacts all over the place. So, when we go, if I'm invited, the people invite, we went to Morocco and the guy who invited us, so we went to Marrakesh. We're being tourists. You're supposed to go to Marrakesh. I didn't like Marrakesh at all. But the guy who invited us said, oh, my parents are living in Fez. If you're going to Fez, they'll show you around. So we met them for lunch and we ended up spending the whole day with them and dinner as well. They were locals and it was fantastic. I mean, what a way to see a city, especially like Fez.
We have the Black Lives Matters movement right now, big issue. I'm interviewing some Indigenous leaders. Did you're Jewish, obviously. You've grown up Jewish. Did you see prejudice arise? Did you see that as part of your life growing up in Montreal?
Very little, actually. Maybe I grew up in a bubble, but I grew up on a street. I mean, the Jewish community in Montreal is fairly closed in, but I grew up on a street where we were just about equal French, Anglo, not Jewish English and English. So we were quite mixed. So I grew up in that Jewish community, but I wasn't. I had a sort of an open thing, certainly where I lived. Although the school I went to, there were like 3 token non-Jews in the class, because other parts of that part of Montreal, Outremont, a lot of Jewish kids went to that school. But outside of school, it was the street itself was mixed. So,
Well, that's encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
What's your next book? Put you on the spot here. When you finish the one you're doing now, do you have any early thoughts what your next thing you want to think about is?
I've got all kinds of unwritten books that I'd like to get out, but I only want to get them out when my reputation is established. And I don't mean that facetiously, because my publisher keeps saying, Henry, stick to management books, or at least the marketing people there, stick to management books. That's where you're known. And I say, the hell with that. So I published Rebalancing Society, and one person was particularly hesitant, but the publisher was keen. And it hasn't sold that well, but it will. I think that its time is coming because of the pandemic. So I've written short stories. I've written all kinds of short stories that I'd like to publish as a book. I've got all kinds of stuff that I'd like to get out. And, once this pandemic is over, and if we can get the Rebalancing Society on the, saluted on the flagpole, as they say, then the other stuff can go.
We talk about the shareholder model and the stakeholder. Clearly, you're a stakeholder kind of person. Do you think that's getting more traction than it did a few years ago?
In theory, always in theory. The Business Roundtable, made up of the major chief executives of U.S. companies, came up with a statement in 2019, got all the press it's about stakeholders. We made a mistake. It's not just about shareholders. La-di-da, thank you very much. They issued the same statement in 2012. And they didn't even remember that they had done that 7 years later, and they didn't do it. It got worse in those 7 years. So you want to make a change, start to make some real changes. Change executive compensation so chief executives are not driven. Get the hell off the stock market because it's dysfunctional. It's absolutely dysfunctional, driving short-term gains for fewer and fewer people. It's destroying the society because it's putting, look what's happening now, The people who own stock are right back where they started, but what about all the people who are unemployed? It's awful. And if business really wants to do something, it's got to wake up. wake up to the stock market, wake up to executive compensation, wake up to all the greenwashing that's going on.
Henry, obviously you're a man of great passion. You love what you're doing. You're going to do this for your whole life. When did you find your passion? My students would like to know is, how do they find their passion? How did you find your passion?
I mean, I was probably born with it, but I get outraged quite easily at things, just not for the sake of outrage, but at things I think are unfair or wrong. If I'm looking for a turning point, I think it was at points in my life where I faced a critical juncture, and I chose the right way to go. I mean, I wrote a piece years ago called Planning on the Left Side, Managing on the Right, accepted by the Harvard Business Review, about the two hemispheres in management. I sent it to Herbert Simon, who was to me the god of management theory, and said, do you think this is okay? He said, no, it's a lot of bunk. And I had to decide whether Simon, this is all public knowledge because with his permission, all the correspondence is published in my book called Mintzberg on Management. And I had to decide whether Simon had missed the boat or I was out of my own territory. And I decided Simon had missed the boat. I held my ground and I never looked back. And it's the same thing with the pandemic. I spent 6 months trying to make a case about pollution and about smoke and about other factors that are driving this pandemic, getting turned down time and time and time again. I have the thickest skin on earth, and I will not give up until that point is at least given a hearing and airing. So look on mintzberg.org and go to pollution and pandemic, or go to mintzberg.org/blog, and you can see two different versions of it.
Why is diversity important to your mind? That's something that's just big in our society. When do you agree that diversity is important, and if so, why?
I missed the word, in my what?
Society is talking about diversity right now.
Yeah.
Would you agree that diversity is important? And if so, why is diversity important? What does it bring to the table?
Well, the word I like is worldliness. You know, when we designed our IMPM, the International Master's Program for Managers, we didn't call it the global mindset. We have 5 modules of about 10 days each. And one of them we called, and they're all built not around business functions, but around mindsets: the reflective mindset, the analytic mindset, the collaborative mindset, the action mindset. And the one we run in India, we call the worldly mindset. And the reason we want to run it in India is because for people who aren't from India, India is another world. It's another world. It is so different. And if you go there and you understand a bit about why it's another world, then you come back and see your own world differently. So diversity is critical in seeing things differently and opening up your mind. They say that you shouldn't bother taking children, on a trip to Europe or that kind of thing until they're teenagers. What point does it make to take a 3-year-old to Europe? They can't appreciate the buildings or the museums. And I say absolutely wrong. A 3-year-old is the one who can appreciate it more than anybody, because the toilet paper is different, the beds are different, the cutlery is different, especially if you go to the Far East and it's chopsticks. Everything is different. That's much more broad than going to a damn museum and seeing some Van Goghs, who I happen to love, but I love Van Gogh's work, but that doesn't broaden people.
Your grandkids are teenagers now, some of them anyway.
Yeah.
Our undergrads around 2021. What are the 3 pieces of advice you have for our undergraduates at McGill? Looking back, you studied McGill many years ago. What are the 3 things you wish they knew today?
Well, it's hard to say it under these circumstances, but you have this incredible opportunity to meet all kinds of kids from all kinds of places, and take advantage of that. Don't close yourself off in all the kids you went to high school with, or your kind of kids who are rich, or sports kids, or whatever it is. Get to know everybody. Get to know everybody under all circumstances. Broaden yourself. Spend a lot of time in extracurricular activities. because a lot of the fun stuff happens there. Don't ignore your studies, but there's so many wonderful things. I joined the McGill Daily. The day I came to McGill, I joined the McGill Daily, the newspaper. It made such a big difference.
You were the sports editor, weren't you?
A sports editor.
And so what was your favorite story? Looking back, like as the sports editor, McGill Daily 50 years ago, what was the big story that you really remember well?
I don't know about a story, but I was sent out to cover rugby. And I couldn't believe what was going on that field. I'd never seen this before. It was like carnage. I couldn't believe it. I published a cartoon showing a head rolling out of the scrum.
So are you optimistic about the future for yourself and for your daughters and grandkids?
You know, the answer is yes. Shows how stupid I am.
What grounds do you have for optimism?
Not much. Just am optimistic. People sometimes wake up, you know, and there are some, and you know, maybe the greatest grounds for optimism is back to your previous question. It's the people who are starting McGill now, who are, you know, such a different breed and so much more open and so much more flexible and so much more oriented. You know, there are waves. When I went to McGill, it was a business commercial wave. You know, all you cared about was getting a job. And now I think we have a wave of kids who care about a lot more important things like climate change and inequalities and so on.